They grabbed her by the arm before she could speak a word. "Sorry, ma'am. This area is for first-class customers only," the manager snapped loudly enough for half the terminal to hear. The woman didn't argue. She simply handed over her special membership card. Platinum, verified, valid, but deliberately ignored. "We need to reconfirm this," he said dismissively, signaling for security to approach. Within moments, the elegant black woman was being escorted out like a criminal, while the white man behind her walked through without a second glance. But what none of them, not the arrogant manager, not the silent security guards, and certainly not the crowd of passengers watching this humiliating scene, could have anticipated was that the woman they just tried to disgrace was no ordinary customer. She was the owner of the entire luxury chain, holding the fate and future of all of them in her hands. Her silence was not submission, but calm before a storm capable of changing everything. The dawn had not yet broken clearly over New York, but LaGuardia Airport was already buzzing with the hurried steps of passengers. Among the busy crowd, one woman stood out: Jessica Carter, the powerful CEO of Carter Capital Group, an international financial conglomerate worth billions. Jessica entered the airport lobby with confident, composed poise. She wore an elegant black wool coat, carrying a luxurious leather briefcase, her steps deliberate yet graceful. Today, she was catching an important flight to Zurich, Switzerland, for a pivotal meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But today, fate had prepared a bitter welcome for her. As soon as she approached the first-class check-in counter, Jessica's polite smile froze under the cold, indifferent gaze of airport staff member Thomas Reed. Thomas, a tall white man with a scowl on his face, quickly glanced over the electronic ticket Jessica extended but had no intention of checking it. Instead, he curtly nodded, coldly saying a sentence that would chill the air around them. "Sorry, economy is to the left." Jessica was momentarily stunned, but calmly responded with a clear, soft voice. "I have a first-class ticket, seat 1A. Thomas didn't bother to look at her ticket. He frowned, his tone growing more hostile. "I told you, miss, economy is to the left. Please, don't cause trouble for the passengers behind you." By now, several curious eyes began to turn toward Jessica. The tension rose with every passing second, and Jessica knew this was no simple misunderstanding. Thomas's eyes flickered with annoyance, as if her skin color alone was enough to make his judgment for him. "I think you should check the system," Jessica continued politely, maintaining her composure and keeping her emotions in check. She understood that things could escalate at any moment if she lost control. "I don't have time for this," Thomas interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. Without another word, he signaled for nearby security personnel to approach. Immediately, two security officers in uniform marched over toward Jessica, their eyes filled with suspicion and zero warmth. "Is there a problem?" Jessica asked, her voice now slightly trembling with anger. "You need to leave immediately. You're causing a disturbance to other passengers," one of the security officers coldly said. Without waiting for Jessica to respond, they grabbed her arm and began to escort her out of the first-class area, to the astonishment of everyone watching. Jessica was led away like a criminal, while whispers of ridicule spread throughout the terminal. Another white passenger stepped up to the counter and was immediately greeted by Thomas Reed with a warm smile and a polite offer. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to first class. Would you like still or sparkling water while you wait?" Jessica stood frozen, watching the scene unfold from a distance, her fists clenched as she fought back the surge of injustice building within her. But Jessica didn't react strongly. She knew this wasn't the end of her fight. It was just the beginning. What seemed like an ordinary day quickly turned into the starting point of a fierce confrontation that would forever change the fate of one of the largest airlines in the U.S. From the position where she was being escorted, Jessica could still clearly see the smug look on Thomas Reed's face as he greeted the white passenger who arrived right after her. The warm smile that Jessica had never received from him just moments ago was now generously given to someone else with painful ease. She could feel the discrimination that Thomas was deliberately showing, almost as if he was trying to emphasize that this place, this privilege, was never meant for people like her. Held tightly by two security guards, Jessica could clearly hear the murmurs of the crowd around her, each word like a sharp knife slicing into her dignity. She probably bought an economy ticket by mistake and ended up in first class. You can tell she doesn't belong here, still trying to act important. She bit her lip, trying to keep her gaze calm, even though a storm of anger was rising within her. Jessica was used to the scrutinizing looks from society towards a successful black woman, but this time was different. This was a systemic insult, intentional and public. It was happening right in a place she regularly passed through during her business trips across the world. And the mastermind, Thomas Reed, was clearly not hiding his intent to humiliate her. Thomas, a man in his 40s, was once an outstanding employee at Orion Air. He prided himself on understanding the class of each customer, but that arrogance had turned into a deeply ingrained, dangerous prejudice. In his eyes, Jessica was not a powerful CEO, not the owner of an international conglomerate. She was just a black woman unworthy of standing in front of the first-class counter. "She really has a first-class ticket," a young female staff member next to Thomas quietly pointed out, seeing Jessica's information on the computer screen. Thomas glanced briefly at the young woman with a dismissive look. His voice rang out coldly, filled with implications. "You're new here. You don't understand our customers. People like her always try to act important. Trust me, if we let people like that through, we'll have to welcome anyone into first class." The young employee fell silent, lowering her head, not daring to say anything else. Thomas returned his gaze to the screen, deliberately reinforcing his decision by erasing Jessica's name from the first-class list. He moved quickly and decisively, then turned to smile warmly at the white passenger in front of him. "I'm so sorry for the wait, sir. Would you like some coffee or tea while you wait?" The rapid shift from the cold, dismissive attitude towards Jessica to the warm, polite service given to another customer made it painfully clear to anyone watching that discrimination was at play. But no one spoke up. They chose to remain silent, leaving Jessica alone amidst the whispers full of malice. Jessica was led to a secluded corner of the lobby, usually reserved for troublemakers and those under security suspicion. She stood there, feeling as if the world around her had suddenly shrunk. A security guard, his tone icy, spoke, "Please provide your identification. We need to verify your flight information." Jessica handed over her documents without saying a word. The guard examined them carefully and frowned. "The information matches completely. No issues. But we've received a report from the check-in counter that you were causing a disturbance by trying to enter the VIP area." Jessica lifted her head, her gaze calm but cold. "I didn't cause a disturbance. I have a valid first-class ticket, and I was simply exercising my right." The guard shrugged, his face indifferent. "We don't make those decisions. Please wait here for management to handle it." Jessica remained silent, clearly understanding that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate insult designed to degrade her dignity. Thomas Reed was not just an unprofessional employee. He was the embodiment of the deep-seated prejudices that persist, someone exploiting a small amount of power to enforce cruel discrimination. But Thomas didn't realize that, at the very moment he decided to push Jessica aside, He had unwittingly ignited a battle he would never be able to win. Jessica Carter had never been one to easily surrender to injustice. Today, she might have been insulted and humiliated, but she had decided she would never remain silent and endure. And Thomas Reed, along with Orion Air, would soon realize they had made the gravest mistake of their lives. Jessica stood silently in the corner of the security waiting area, trying to control her breath and maintain her usual calm. The whispers, the suspicious looks from both passengers and airport staff continued to focus on her, creating an invisible but heavy pressure. The feeling of injustice hadn't faded since the shock at the check-in counter, but Jessica knew that everything was far from over. This was just the beginning of a day filled with deliberate acts of humiliation aimed squarely at her. After about 10 minutes of waiting, a young security officer approached Jessica. He had a thin frame, but his sharp gaze was full of scrutiny. Without a smile, he gestured for her to follow. "Miss Carter, we need to conduct a bag search. Please follow me," he said. Jessica didn't respond, merely nodding gently and picking up her personal belongings to follow him. The gravity of the situation was beginning to become clear, and she realized she wasn't just the victim of a minor incident. She was facing a system of bias that had intentionally targeted her. When she reached the TSA checkpoint, the eyes of all the security staff seemed to simultaneously land on her. An uncomfortable silence filled the space. Other passengers continued to move through the checkpoint at a normal pace, greeted with friendly smiles, but Jessica was directed to a separate path. The one used for those under suspicion, where passengers are subjected to more intense scrutiny. Immediately, a TSA agent named Sandra Miller, a middle-aged woman with neatly tied blonde hair, walked up and gestured for Jessica to place her bag on the inspection table. Sandra was known for being strict, but at times she took it too far, especially with passengers of color. "Do you have anything to declare, Miss Carter?" Sandra asked, her tone cold and accusatory. Jessica looked directly into her eyes, her response calm yet firm. "No. Everything has been checked according to international security standards." Sandra raised an eyebrow in doubt. Then, without saying another word, she roughly pulled open Jessica's leather bag. The motion was so forceful that some documents nearly fell out. Jessica quickly grabbed them, her gaze reflecting clear discontent, but Sandra didn't seem to care. Instead of conducting a normal search, Sandra began pulling out each personal item from Jessica's bag, placing them on the table for everyone around to see. A luxury watch, a tablet, important documents marked Top Secret, Carter Capital Group. Jessica felt her heart tighten as her company's confidential materials were laid out in front of the curious and malicious eyes of the TSA staff and surrounding passengers. Sandra deliberately opened the file and flipped through the first few pages. She smirked sarcastically, sneering, "Oh, the powerful CEO? I didn't expect someone like you to be carrying around a confidential file like this through the airport. Very suspicious." Jessica couldn't hide her frustration, but she still kept her composure, responding briefly. "These are my company's confidential materials. You have no right to view them." Sandra shrugged indifferently, her voice dripping with provocation. "Ma'am, my job is to ensure flight safety. I have the right to check anything I deem necessary, unless you have something to hide." Her words immediately sparked a few chuckles from the other TSA officers nearby, but they quickly fell silent when they saw Jessica shoot them a stern look. Sandra continued rummaging through Jessica's things carelessly, causing important documents to become wrinkled and damaged. Jessica struggled to maintain her control, though anger was rising inside her, hard to suppress. Nearby, a white passenger was quickly and comfortably waved through security. No need to open their bag, no need for ID checks. It was all over in a flash, and they were greeted with polite apologies for the delay. This stark contrast made it painfully clear to Jessica that she was suffering a systematic form of discrimination, not a random event. "You really think I don't know what you're doing?" Jessica spoke up calmly, her gaze cold, but her voice still trying to maintain the minimum level of politeness. Sandra paused for a moment, staring directly at Jessica, her eyes flashing with challenge. "We're just following protocol. If you're dissatisfied, you have the right to file a complaint later. But for now, please cooperate to avoid causing further trouble for yourself." Jessica stood still for a second. Sandra's words weren't just an explanation of procedure, they were a provocation. A way for Sandra to assert her power and superiority over a successful black woman like Jessica. Jessica silently looked around the room, realizing that everyone was watching her, as if she were the cause of all the trouble. She knew that reacting strongly would only make things worse. But deep inside, Jessica was determined that she would not let this incident pass in silence. What was happening needed to be addressed, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered similar injustices. Sandra ended the search by coldly returning Jessica's personal items and saying provocatively, "For now, everything seems fine, but we'll be watching you closely on this trip, Miss Carter." Jessica didn't reply. She gently packed her things carefully, trying to keep her trembling hands from showing. She knew the real battle was still ahead, and Sandra, along with the others, those who thought they could humiliate Jessica at will, would soon realize that they had made the gravest mistake of their lives. After packing up her personal belongings, which had been rifled through during Sandra Miller's malicious search, Jessica tried to regain her usual calm demeanor. Despite having faced countless pressures in her career, this was the first time Jessica felt so deeply hurt. Not only by the clear acts of discrimination, but also by the cold, indifferent attitudes of the people standing before her. Those who wore their small amount of power like armor, using it to trample on another person's dignity. Jessica glanced at her watch. The flight was about to depart. She couldn't afford to delay any longer. She hurried to the boarding gate, hoping that the trouble she'd just endured would be left behind, at least until she landed in Zurich. But when she reached the gate, her heart tightened once again. The electronic board displayed her name clearly, but instead of the first-class seat 1A, it mockingly flashed, "Seat 32B, Economy." Jessica was stunned. Seat 32B, a terrible position near the bathroom, one that passengers typically avoid due to its inconvenience and discomfort. She understood that this wasn't just a system error. It was a message, a deliberate attempt to undermine her. Jessica immediately walked over to the customer service desk near the gate, where Thomas Reed was standing with another employee. When he saw her, Thomas flashed a mocking smirk, his eyes clearly saying that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Mr. Reed, I need you to check this immediately," Jessica said clearly, trying to keep her voice calm. "There's a mistake here. My ticket is clearly first class, seat 1A, but the electronic board is showing seat 32B in economy." Thomas Reed calmly flipped through a few pages, taking his time, as if enjoying the look of anxiety and disappointment that was gradually becoming evident on Jessica's face. After a moment, Thomas raised an eyebrow and coldly responded, "Sorry, but the system is showing it correctly, Miss Carter. Your ticket has been downgraded to economy class. This is not an error." Jessica was stunned. She knew this was a cruel joke from Thomas, but she chose not to lose her composure. She continued firmly, "I never received any notification about this. My ticket is first class, and I demand that you correct this immediately." Thomas tilted his head, his gaze sharp but still carrying a smirk of contempt. "We apologize for the inconvenience, but the airline has the right to change the seating of any passenger at any time for legitimate reasons. We had to prioritize other more important customers." "More important customers?" Jessica repeated, feeling a surge of anger inside, but she tried to maintain a polite demeanor. "What do you mean by saying I'm not an important customer?" Thomas smirked further, his voice lowering just enough for only Jessica to hear, full of defiance. "I mean, we prioritize customers who deserve it, and unfortunately, in this case, you are not on that priority list." Jessica could feel the anger burning in her chest, but she still held it back, knowing that lashing out now would only make things worse. Around her, a few other passengers started to notice their conversation. She continued, her voice still calm but firm. "I demand to speak with a senior manager immediately. This is an intentional insult and a violation of my rights as a customer." Thomas shrugged dismissively, deliberately speaking louder so other passengers could clearly hear. "I've explained everything, Miss Carter. Your complaint will not change our decision. Please accept it and don't cause further trouble." A few passengers nearby began whispering, some looking at her with pity, but most avoided making eye contact, pretending not to see the clear injustice happening right in front of them. That silence, more than the mocking words, hurt Jessica even more. It was the silence of those who witnessed injustice, but chose to ignore it to maintain their own peace. "You will regret what you're doing," Jessica said quietly, just loud enough for Thomas to hear, her gaze cold and sharp as a knife. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Thomas sneered and turned his back, walking away without responding, clearly dismissing Jessica's words. She stood there, a sense of helplessness slowly filling her body. She understood that this action wasn't just a personal insult. It was a proud message from Orion Air. "We have the power to decide your worth, and in our eyes, you are not worthy." But in that moment, Jessica made a silent vow to herself. She would not let them achieve their goal so easily. People like Thomas Reed might think they had won, but they couldn't have known that. In the silence that seemed like submission, Jessica had already begun to plot her response. A carefully thought-out plan to force racists like Thomas Reed to face their own mistakes and prejudices. A plan that would make Orion Air and everyone involved realize that they had angered a woman who would never accept defeat, and Jessica Carter would make sure that the price they paid for their actions today would be a lesson they would never forget. Jessica silently turned away from the service desk, trying to hide the disappointment and frustration that filled her heart. The atmosphere around her felt thick, heavy with the indifferent and cold glances of the crowd of passengers who were clearly trying to avoid her, as if she were a nuisance to be steered clear of as quickly as possible. Each step led Jessica towards the VIP lounge, a place she had visited countless times before, always greeted with the warmest and most courteous service from Orion Air. But now, after everything that had transpired, Jessica could feel the deliberate isolation they were imposing on her. As she approached the lounge entrance, Jessica held on to a faint hope that at least in this familiar place, she would be treated with the respect and courtesy she had always received before. She gently handed her electronic ticket and ID to the female staff at the desk, someone she had never met before. "May I see your ticket?" the staff member asked mechanically, her eyes not meeting Jessica's, but rather focusing intently on the computer screen in front of her. Jessica handed over the ticket, her tone soft yet patient. "Of course. This is my ticket, first class, flight to Zurich, flight number 882. I would like to enter the VIP lounge." The staff member scanned the ticket, then immediately frowned. Her voice turned dry and cold. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter, but the system clearly shows that your seat has been downgraded to economy. The VIP lounge access no longer applies to your seating class." Jessica remained calm but firm, trying to keep her composure with each word. "There seems to be some confusion. I haven't received any notification about this downgrade. Please check again, as I clearly paid for a first-class ticket along with the associated services." The staff member sighed impatiently and replied mechanically, clearly not wanting to continue the argument with Jessica. "Ma'am, the system has displayed it very clearly. We are simply following the policy of Orion Air. If you wish to file a complaint, you should contact the airline's customer service. At the moment, I cannot allow you into the lounge." Jessica stared at the staff member, the disappointment and anger rising sharply inside her, but she still tried to keep her emotions in check, gently asking, "I fully understand you're just doing your job, but could you help me contact your supervisor or manager so this can be resolved here and now?" The staff member immediately shook her head without hesitation. "Sorry, Miss Carter. The manager is not available right now. There's nothing I can do to assist you." Jessica fell silent, staring deeply into the cold eyes of the staff, trying to find even the smallest hint of goodwill, but it was all in vain. The indifference from this staff member was no different from the attitude she had received from Thomas Reed earlier. It felt like a coordinated and systematic effort to make her feel unwelcome at this place. Jessica took a step back, her gaze drifting toward the lounge, where a few white passengers were enjoying coffee and pastries, chatting happily. A peaceful, friendly scene that was only a few steps away but now felt impossibly distant. Leaving the VIP lounge area, Jessica sought a quiet seat in the public waiting area. At that moment, a service staff member pushed a cart of snacks for first-class passengers past her. He cheerfully served the other passengers, but when it was Jessica's turn, he glanced at her, quickly checked his list, then shook his head. "Sorry, you're not on the list for the snack service." Jessica paused for a moment, quickly explaining, "I registered for a special medical meal due to health reasons. No gluten, no lactose. Please check again." The staff member reluctantly checked once more and shook his head indifferently. "I checked carefully, Miss Carter. Your name isn't on the list for today. If you want, you can find something to eat at the sales counter near gate 22. He said this and quickly walked away, leaving Jessica sitting there with a deep sense of hurt. She looked around, feeling as though she was being slowly isolated, stripped of every comfort and entitlement that should rightfully be hers. She realized that what was happening wasn't random. It was a series of well-planned actions designed to degrade her, to make her feel invisible, unworthy of respect. They were deliberately isolating her, pushing her into a state of confusion and despair, but Jessica knew she could not let them achieve their goal. Within the silence that seemed to signify helplessness, a powerful will and a resolve for retaliation was quietly forming. They might think that Jessica Carter had been defeated, but the truth was, she was preparing to turn all the insults of the day into a powerful, decisive response that would make those who looked down on her regret it for the rest of their lives. Jessica sat quietly in the waiting area, trying to steady her emotions after being repeatedly denied even the most basic services she was entitled to. She could clearly feel the cold, isolating atmosphere gradually closing in on her, as if an invisible wall had been erected between her and the other passengers. The silence of those around her made her feel more alone and vulnerable than ever. But Jessica didn't allow herself to fall into despair. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had to face the situation with calm, even though her anger was boiling inside. As Jessica tried to calm herself, a group of security officers suddenly appeared, walking briskly toward her. Leading the group was a tall man in a security uniform, his ID badge reading Michael Thompson. Thompson's face was cold and hard, his sharp eyes full of suspicion as he approached Jessica. "Are you Jessica Carter?" Thompson asked, his authoritative voice loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding crowd. Jessica looked up, trying to keep her voice as calm as possible. "Yes, that's me. What's going on?" Thompson immediately presented a small box, inside which was the luxury watch Jessica always wore on important business trips. He smirked, his tone full of accusation. "We've received a report that the watch you are carrying is a counterfeit, an illegal product. We need you to prove its origin immediately, in front of our security staff and the passengers here." Thompson's words rang out clear and cold, immediately drawing all eyes in the waiting area toward Jessica. A few people began whispering, pointing at her with skeptical and judgmental glances. The situation quickly became tense, the atmosphere suffocating with the curious anticipation of the crowd. Jessica took a deep breath, maintaining a calm gaze as she faced Thompson, determined to stand her ground against this blatant and deliberate accusation. "This watch is genuine, and I have all the receipts and certification documents from the manufacturer. You can't just make accusations like this without any evidence." But Thompson didn't flinch in the face of Jessica's strong resistance. He calmly responded in a tone that deliberately made sure the crowd could hear each word clearly. "If you say it's real, there's no reason why you can't prove it right here. I believe a powerful CEO like you must know the value of cooperating with airport security, don't you?" Thompson's insinuations only made Jessica's anger rise even more sharply. She knew this was a calculated move to publicly humiliate her, forcing her to prove her innocence under the scrutinizing gaze of strangers. With no other choice, Jessica pulled her phone from her bag, quickly opening the folder containing the digital receipt and the certification from the renowned brand where she had purchased the watch. She calmly held her phone screen up to Thompson. "These are all the proofs of the watch's origin. I expect you to stop this baseless accusation now." Thompson glanced at the screen dismissively, then turned to look at the other officers, his eyes full of skepticism, deliberately dragging out the situation before speaking slowly with a challenging tone. "We need to check it more thoroughly. Please hand over the watch for verification. Once we're done, we'll return it to you." Jessica immediately objected forcefully, her voice firmer than ever. "No, I completely disagree with this unreasonable request. I've already provided valid evidence. You have no right to seize my personal property based on an unfounded accusation." Thompson furrowed his brow, his face showing slight anger at Jessica's firm stance. He moved closer to her, his voice dropping a bit but still carrying pressure. "You're obstructing our work, Miss Carter. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to put you on the list of disruptive passengers. The consequences will be much more severe. Are you sure you want to go down that path?" Jessica looked directly into Thompson's eyes, her gaze filled with resolve and unwavering determination. She responded decisively, "I will not yield to these false accusations and deliberate insults. If you want to proceed, go ahead. I'll handle this in my own way." For a moment, Thompson was taken aback by Jessica's unwavering attitude, but he quickly regained his authoritative composure, signaling for the officer beside him to make a note on the tablet. Jessica knew that she had just been labeled as a disruptive passenger in the system, a malicious label that would create more obstacles for her in the future. The people around them continued to watch Jessica closely, but no one spoke out in her defense. They silently observed with a mix of curiosity and distaste. Jessica stood motionless, fully aware that she had been pushed into a situation with no way to back out. But deep in her heart, she knew this wasn't the time to give up. Thompson might have thought that his actions had succeeded in hurting and breaking Jessica, but he didn't realize that her resolve and determination had only grown stronger. Those who had caused her this humiliation would soon face consequences far greater than anything they could imagine, and Jessica would be the one to make sure that happened. Jessica stood frozen in the middle of the bustling airport, the feeling of anger mixed with helplessness rising within her after Michael Thompson's malicious accusation. She gripped her phone tightly, trying to suppress the chaotic emotions threatening to explode inside her. The suffocating atmosphere seemed to tighten around Jessica with each passing second. Never before had she felt so insulted, and what hurt her the most was that everything had unfolded so publicly, under the cold, indifferent gaze of those around her. The flight was about to depart, and Jessica took a deep breath, trying to remain calm and continue her journey. She walked away from the security checkpoint and headed toward the boarding gate. But after taking just a few steps, she realized her carry-on bag, her black leather briefcase filled with highly confidential documents, had disappeared from the designated area. Her heart suddenly raced, panic rising as she quickly scanned the nearby area, but there was no sign of her bag. Jessica rushed back to the security checkpoint, approaching a nearby staff member, her voice filled with concern, but still maintaining her composure. "Excuse me. I just passed through security a few minutes ago, but now I can't find my carry-on. Could you please check where it is?" The security staff glanced at her indifferently before responding casually. "You're Jessica Carter, right? I've been informed that your bag was seized for exceeding the allowed size limit. You should go to the special baggage handling area to collect it later." Jessica could hardly believe what she was hearing. She quickly responded, "That's impossible. I've used this bag on many international flights before, and it's always met the size requirements. There's no reason for you to seize my personal property." The staff member shrugged, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Jessica. "I'm just following what's in the system. If you have a complaint, you should go to the baggage handling department. I can't help you further." Jessica felt that this was just another part of a series of deliberate actions to cause her trouble, but she remained calm and quickly moved to the lost baggage area to search for her important bag. Once there, Jessica immediately demanded to speak with the person in charge. A female staff member named Amanda appeared, holding a small tablet and glancing at her with reluctance. "We've received your bag, but since it exceeds the size regulations, it was placed in the special baggage area. You'll need to wait for us to inspect it further before we return it." Jessica immediately responded firmly, her voice controlled but sharp. "I will state again that this bag is well within the carry-on size limits. I demand you return it immediately. It contains highly sensitive documents and personal items that are very important." Amanda raised an eyebrow in a provocative manner, showing no intention of cooperating. "Sorry, Ms. Carter, but I can't do anything other than follow the regulations. Please wait here and we'll notify you when the inspection is complete." Jessica was forced to wait, her anxiety growing by the minute. More than half an hour later, a young staff member came over with her bag, but when Jessica saw it, her heart sank. The luxury leather bag she had carried was now severely damaged. The zipper was misaligned, the surface was scratched, and there were signs of dampness inside. Jessica quickly opened the bag, her heart stopping when she saw what was inside. The important documents had been crumpled and soaked, as if they had been deliberately ruined. Worse yet, the box containing her personal watch was also roughly opened, the expensive watch thrown carelessly into the corner, its glass face scratched deeply, nearly destroyed. Shaking, Jessica turned to the staff member in front of her, unable to hide her fury. "Who did this to my bag? Who is responsible for this damage?" The young staff member appeared flustered, avoiding Jessica's gaze. I'm just the one returning the bag. I really don't know what happened. Perhaps during the security inspection something happened to your bag." Jessica firmly demanded to speak with a superior, but the staff member quickly shook her head and left with an apologetic look. Jessica stood alone, her anger and frustration surging, threatening to overwhelm her right then and there. What was happening was no longer a mere coincidence, it was intentional. A mental attack planned meticulously to degrade and humiliate her ruthlessly. She could feel her control slipping away. Jessica stood there in the midst of the crowd, her breath quickening, trying her best not to let her emotions explode right then and there. But Jessica knew, deep down, that she couldn't just keep silently enduring. The people behind all this had crossed the final line. In her heart, a fierce resolve had ignited stronger than ever before. She silently vowed that all those responsible for what had happened today, from Thomas Reed, Michael Thompson, to anyone else trying to diminish her value and dignity, would soon face consequences far beyond anything they could ever imagine. They thought they were in control of the situation, but they had seriously underestimated Jessica Carter, and the price they would pay would far exceed anything they could foresee. Jessica stood frozen, trying to keep her hands from trembling as she looked at the severely damaged leather briefcase. The important documents inside were soaked and crumpled, and her precious watch was shattered, lying in the box like a cold, mocking challenge aimed directly at her. She felt as though everything was pushing her beyond her breaking point, but in her mind, Jessica kept telling herself to stay composed and retain her dignity. Yet, with every breath, every passing second, it felt as though the weight of it all was crushing her chest. Just as Jessica was about to gather the remains of her briefcase to continue her journey, a cold voice behind her shattered the little bit of calm she had managed to hold on to. "Miss Carter, we need to conduct an additional body check immediately." Jessica turned around to face the emotionless face of the airport security officer, Richard Evans, a tall man with a scrutinizing, suspicious gaze that didn't waver. His tone was emotionless but clearly challenging, enough to make Jessica realize this was no ordinary security check. Jessica took a deep breath, trying her best to keep her voice steady, though her inner rage was palpable. "I've already gone through security checks earlier. Do you have a valid reason for asking me to go through another body search?" Evans crossed his arms, a half smirk curling on his lips in a provocative manner as he spoke in a detached tone, each word seeming deliberately intended to wound Jessica's sense of dignity. "We just received an alert in the system, marking you as a high-risk passenger. The additional check is mandatory. If you don't cooperate, I'm afraid we'll have to deny you boarding." Jessica could clearly hear the curious and malicious whispers of the surrounding passengers, all their eyes turning to her as though she were a dangerous criminal. She felt like every gaze, every whisper, was tearing apart the calm exterior she had worked so hard to maintain throughout the day. "I have nothing to hide," Jessica responded politely but firmly. "But I request that this check be conducted according to proper protocol and with a female officer present." Evans raised an eyebrow, his mocking smirk widening. "Sorry, but we don't have a female officer available right now. You can either let me perform the check here, or we'll have to treat you as a non-cooperative passenger and proceed with other measures." Jessica froze at Evans' deliberate and insulting words. She glanced around and saw that many were waiting to see how she would react. With no other choice, she reluctantly agreed, but made her conditions clear. "Only conduct the steps according to the rules. If it goes beyond those limits, I will consider it harassment." Evans didn't reply, signaling for Jessica to stand with her legs apart and arms raised high in front of the dozens of curious onlookers. He began the check with a metal detector and then proceeded with a crude, disrespectful body search. His movements were slow and deliberate, particularly highlighting sensitive areas in an almost provocative manner, as if to humiliate Jessica before the watching crowd. Immediately, Jessica jerked back, her eyes burning with fury, as her voice rang out with authority. "Enough! This is not a security check. This is clearly public harassment. I demand that you stop immediately and bring me your senior manager right now." Jessica's words rang out forcefully, but Evans seemed undeterred, even smiling mockingly as he spoke loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I'm just doing my job. If Miss Carter feels offended, she has every right to file a complaint later. But right now, either you continue to cooperate, or we'll have to mark you as a disruptive passenger and prevent you from boarding." Jessica stared into Evan's eyes, trying to find even a shred of humanity in his cold gaze, but she found nothing but satisfaction in humiliating her. She looked around, and everyone was simply watching. No one speaking up for her. No one intervening in the obvious injustice unfolding before them. At that moment, a man in a suit, clearly a senior manager from Orion Air, approached. Jessica immediately walked toward him and laid out everything that had just happened, not omitting any details. "This is clearly an act of body harassment and personal defamation. I demand that you handle this immediately and provide a proper explanation." The manager glanced at Jessica indifferently, before coldly responding like a machine. "We're sorry for your experience, Miss Carter, but the airport security staff are simply doing their job. We don't see anything wrong here." Jessica was stunned, the feeling of injustice and helplessness spreading through her body. She realized that even the airline's management was intentionally turning a blind eye to these blatant offenses. They had chosen to side with the wrongdoers, leaving her completely isolated. Jessica silently stepped back, anger and despair twisting inside her. But in that moment, deep within her, a fierce determination flared up stronger than ever before. She knew that all the silence and humiliation she had endured today would never be forgotten. Those responsible for this, Thomas Reed, Michael Thompson, Evans, and even the senior management of Orion Air, would soon face consequences far more severe than they could ever imagine. And Jessica would make sure that they would never forget the lesson she was about to deliver. Jessica silently turned away from the security checkpoint, each step feeling heavier with the frustration and pain of everything that had happened that day. But in her mind, there was still a flicker of hope. The flight would soon take off, and she would escape from this hostile, suffocating place, at least for the next few hours. Jessica fought to suppress all the negative emotions, knowing that there was an important meeting waiting for her in Zurich. As she approached the boarding gate, Jessica saw the line of passengers slowly moving toward the plane. She let out a quiet sigh, telling herself that there was only one more step to go before she could leave all of this behind. But as she reached the ticket counter, her heart sank once again when she saw the familiar, malicious face of Thomas Reed, standing next to a tall man in a suit with a name tag reading Trent Maxwell, Senior Manager, Orion Air. Thomas quickly glanced over at Jessica, a smug smile spreading across his face as he whispered something into Trent Maxwell's ear. Trent's demeanor immediately shifted from calm to cold and sharp. Jessica stepped forward, trying to keep her voice steady, polite but firm. "Hello, Mr. Maxwell. I'm Jessica Carter. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding in the system, but my ticket was clearly booked and paid for in full. I request that you check again and allow me to board the plane immediately." Trent Maxwell looked at Jessica with an air of superiority, no hint of kindness in his cold eyes. He opened his tablet, pretended to check something quickly, then casually replied, "I'm sorry, Miss Carter, but your name has been removed from the passenger list. We cannot allow you to board this flight." Jessica felt the surge of anger rise within her once again, but she kept her composure and pressed on. "Why have I been removed from the passenger list? I have all my documents, my ticket is valid, and I've passed all the necessary security procedures." Trent Maxwell glanced over at Thomas Reed, then replied in an indifferent tone, deliberately loud enough for those around them to hear. "We received an alert marking you as a disruptive passenger, a safety risk to the flight. To ensure the safety of other passengers, we had to remove you from this flight." Jessica could hear the whispers of the crowd around her, their eyes filled with curiosity and disdain, making her feel like she was being torn apart under their cold, judgmental stares. She struggled to control her emotions, replying with determination, "That's a completely baseless accusation. I have followed all the necessary procedures and have never caused any disturbance or posed a threat to flight safety. I demand that you review this immediately or provide clear evidence for this accusation." Trent Maxwell remained unshaken by Jessica's firm response. Instead, he became even colder and more rigid. "I've made myself very clear, Miss Carter. Our decision is final. Please cooperate and don't cause further trouble." Before Jessica could respond, Maxwell signaled for a group of nearby security officers to approach. Jessica immediately recognized the danger, her anger now burning fiercely as she reacted. "You are making a huge mistake. I will never stay silent in the face of this blatant insult. I demand to speak with the highest authority in your company right now." But Maxwell paid no attention to her request, simply ordering the security team with a small gesture of his head. "Take her out of this area immediately. Make sure she doesn't cause any further disruption." Without hesitation, 2 security officers quickly approached, grabbing Jessica's arms with force and cold indifference, despite her attempts to struggle and loudly protest. "Let go of me. You have no right to do this. This is clearly an illegal and immoral act." The more she resisted, the more pressure the security officers applied, forcing Jessica to move away from the boarding area in full view of many passengers. She was escorted publicly and humiliatingly, each step leaving an indelible mark of anger and pain within her. As she was being led away, Jessica caught a glimpse of Thomas Reed's satisfied, triumphant smile. His gaze seemed to tell her that he had won this battle, but Jessica knew this was just the beginning of the real fight. She was taken to a secluded area far from the boarding gate, where she was made to sit on a small chair, closely monitored by security. Jessica sat there, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness threatening to overwhelm her. But at the same time, deep inside, the resolve to make those who had wronged her pay for their actions was growing stronger than ever. Trent Maxwell, Thomas Reed, and everyone involved in humiliating Jessica today would soon face consequences far beyond anything they could imagine. Jessica knew that those who underestimated her had chosen the wrong opponent, a person who would never bow to injustice and would make sure to repay every ounce of the pain she had endured, clearly and decisively. Jessica sat motionless in the small room where security had escorted her, the air around her thick with the anger and frustration of everything that had transpired that day. She stared blankly into the space before her, her mind replaying the events that had just unfolded, from Thomas Reed's cruel mockery to Michael Thompson's smug, provoking gaze, and finally to Trent Maxwell's cold, indifferent, and even ruthless demeanor. Each moment, each word felt like a sharp blade carving deep into her heart, testing her patience and endurance. However, amid the chaos, Jessica gradually regained control. She would not allow herself to sink into despair. Instead, the icy calmness and determination slowly replaced the fury inside her. The people who had humiliated her today had made a fatal mistake. they had severely underestimated their opponent. Jessica was not the type of person to easily accept defeat, nor was she someone who would silently endure injustice. She calmly pulled her phone from her jacket pocket and dialed a familiar number. Within seconds, a deep, professional male voice answered on the other end. "Carter, Capital Group International Investment. How can I help you?" Jessica took a deep breath, keeping her voice clear, steady, and confident, yet surprisingly calm. "This is Jessica Carter. I need to speak with Mr. Mark Townsend immediately, Executive Director, Emergency Matters. Please transfer me to him now." There was a brief moment of silence, the voice on the other end now noticeably more urgent, clearly surprised to hear Jessica calling at this moment. "Of course, Miss Carter. Please hold on for a moment." Moments later, Mark Townsend's composed yet authoritative voice came through the phone. "Jessica, what's going on? I received word that you've encountered an issue at the airport. Do you need us to intervene right away?" Jessica maintained her calm, but her words carried an icy resolve. "Mark, I'm in a serious situation at LaGuardia Airport with Orion Air. I've been publicly humiliated and removed from a flight I booked and paid for in full, all for a completely fabricated reason. I need you to activate the full retaliation plan immediately, without delay. No need to wait for any further instructions." There was a brief silence on the other end, as if Mark was assessing the severity of the situation. After a tense pause, he spoke with unwavering certainty. "I understand. Jessica, are you absolutely sure you want to activate the plan now? Once it's set in motion, the consequences for Orion Air will be severe, possibly irreversible." Jessica closed her eyes for a second, the memories of the insults from earlier flashing quickly in her mind. It felt like all the damage and humiliation she had endured were converging into a powerful, unstoppable force of will. She opened her eyes, her gaze filled with unshakable determination. "This is the perfect time. These people have disrespected me and everything we stand for. They must understand that the consequences of their actions are inevitable. Let's proceed immediately." Mark's voice came through clearly, filled with respect and decisiveness. "I understand. We will activate the plan right away. Orion Air will soon face consequences unlike anything they've experienced. I'll keep you updated on every step of the process." "Thank you, Mark. I'll be waiting for the updates." Jessica ended the call and placed her phone on the table. Her gaze had shifted, no longer filled with simple anger, but with the absolute confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that from this moment on there was no turning back. The people responsible for what had happened today, Trent Maxwell, Thomas Reed, and everyone else, would soon face consequences far beyond what they could have imagined. On the other end, Mark Townsend immediately called for an emergency meeting at the headquarters of Carter Capital Group. Within minutes, a team of top-tier legal, financial, and PR experts had gathered, ready to launch an unprecedented, full-scale campaign in response to the blatant insults of Orion Air. Meanwhile, at the airport, Trent Maxwell and Thomas Reed continued their conversation, even appearing satisfied as they saw Jessica being removed from the flight publicly. They were confident that the incident would have no serious repercussions. To them, Jessica was just an ordinary passenger, someone without the means to fight back or cause any major disruption. But what Trent and Thomas couldn't have known was that they had just angered a woman with the greatest economic power they had ever encountered. A woman who had the ability to bring even a prestigious airline like Orion Air to its knees with a simple phone call. Jessica stood up, adjusting her clothes with serious confidence, and walked toward the door. She knew the days ahead would not be easy, but her decision was final and unchangeable. A fierce battle had officially begun, and Jessica Carter would never allow herself to be passive again. At that moment, the eerie silence from Jessica was the clearest warning of the terrifying consequences awaiting those who dared to insult and disrespect her. As Jessica quietly placed her phone back in her pocket and walked with deliberate calm toward the door of the small room. A violent earthquake was silently forming and beginning to spread all the way to the heart of Orion Air's operations. No one at this prestigious airline could have imagined that the reckless decisions of a few biased employees could push the entire company into an unprecedented crisis in its history. In Orion Air's executive office, Leonard Westbrook, the senior director, was sitting comfortably in his familiar leather chair. Westbrook was a well-groomed man, his gray hair meticulously styled, always appearing in expensive suits with a confident, almost arrogant smile. He had complete faith in his control over the airline and never paid attention to minor incidents beneath him, until his assistant hurriedly pushed open the office door, panic evident on his face. "Mr. Westbrook, we've just received an emergency update from Carter Capital Group. Jessica Carter has ordered an immediate withdrawal of $600 million in investments. This is not a rumor. She's already begun the process with the bank and financial partners." Westbrook felt his heart skip a beat, but quickly forced himself to regain his composure, raising an eyebrow and deliberately keeping his voice calm. $600 million. There must be some mistake. Carter Capital Group and Orion Air have had a great partnership for years. Why would Jessica do this all of a sudden? The assistant quickly placed a file on Westbrook's desk, his voice trembling with tension. "Sir, security reports show that Jessica Carter was removed from her flight and was seriously mistreated at LaGuardia Airport by our staff. She activated the investment withdrawal as an immediate act of retaliation. The news has already spread through internal channels, and the media is starting to inquire." Westbrook froze, quickly flipping through the file, his eyes scanning the reports. Each line felt like the fuel being added to the fire of tension burning inside him. The familiar names appeared before him: Thomas Reed, Michael Thompson, Trent Maxwell. He couldn't believe his own employees had acted so thoughtlessly, causing a financial and media disaster unlike any he had ever faced in his career. Westbrook suddenly felt his throat dry up, the world around him spinning out of control. A contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars wasn't just about money. It was about reputation, investor trust, and the financial stability necessary for Orion Air to maintain its competitive position in the international market. He stood up abruptly, unable to suppress his voice, which had lost its usual composure as he shouted, "Get Trent Maxwell and Thomas Reed to my office now. I need to see them immediately, and call an emergency board meeting in the next 10 minutes." A few minutes later, Trent Maxwell entered the meeting room with his usual confident and somewhat arrogant attitude, completely unaware of the storm that had just hit. Thomas Reed followed behind, looking much more worried, as though he had sensed that something was very wrong. Westbrook stared at his two employees, his gaze colder than ever. "Do you two have any idea what you've done? You've just destroyed the reputation and financial future of Orion Air with one stupid, thoughtless decision." Maxwell looked slightly taken aback by the rare fury of Westbrook, trying to explain. "Sir, we were just following the proper security procedures when a passenger caused a disturbance." Westbrook immediately cut him off, his voice sharp and full of authority. "Jessica Carter is not just some regular passenger you can insult. You knew exactly who she was. She's the head of the largest investment fund that Orion Air depends on. What the hell were you thinking, publicly humiliating one of the most powerful financial figures today?" Maxwell's face quickly turned pale as he realized the gravity of the situation. But Westbrook didn't give him any time to respond further, continuing with an even harsher tone. Right now, Carter Capital Group is executing a full withdrawal of $600 million from Orion Air. This is going to lead to the biggest financial crisis in the company's history, all because of your foolish actions. Westbrook turned to Thomas Reed, his gaze becoming even more menacing. And you, Reed, did you think Orion Air was a place for you to act out your personal prejudices? Your behavior has crossed every acceptable boundary. Both you and Maxwell will be fully responsible for the consequences of this incident. Thomas Reed stood motionless, his eyes lowered to the ground, fully aware that his career had just ended right there. Westbrook sat down again, placing his hand on his forehead, trying to regain control. His voice lowered, but remained resolute. Now, we must be ready for the coming crisis. Orion Air will face pressure from the media, investors, and regulators. We need to find ways to control the damage. But let me warn you, this will be a very difficult battle. The atmosphere in the meeting room was heavy with silence. At this moment, both Westbrook, Maxwell, and Reed all understood that the mistake they had made was not only a financial loss, but it could also destroy their personal careers and reputations. And what they realized too late was that they had just provoked a terrifying force in the form of Jessica Carter, one that was now ready to crush anyone who dared to insult her. As soon as Leonard Westbrook finished the emergency meeting with Trent Maxwell and Thomas Reed, a tidal wave of chaos began to spread rapidly throughout Orion Air. Within less than an hour, the news of Jessica Carter, the powerful woman behind Carter Capital Group, officially withdrawing her $600 million investment spread like wildfire, causing an immediate shock to all of the company's financial partners and investors. But those losses were just the beginning of a much more severe chain of consequences awaiting Orion Air. At the federal government office, an emergency meeting was convened with just as much tension and gravity. Senior officials from the U.S. Department of Transportation quickly gathered for a special session to discuss the incident involving Orion Air, its most important partner in a $2 billion air transportation contract, which handles highly classified government flights for security, military, and diplomatic purposes. Transportation Secretary Robert Coleman, a stern man with graying hair, sat upright, his focus intense on the stacks of reports in front of him. Coleman was well known for being tough and intolerant of any form of misconduct, especially when it came to issues of racial discrimination and human rights. He removed his reading glasses, his eyes sharp, his voice decisive and without hesitation. With the clear evidence of Orion Air's racial discrimination recently exposed by the media, we cannot continue to work with them. If we maintain this partnership, the damage to our reputation and public trust will be devastating. I propose we immediately terminate the $2 billion contract with Orion Air. The other members of the meeting silently nodded in agreement, no one daring to challenge him. The decision was passed instantly, and just minutes later, an official press release from the U.S. government was issued. The U.S. Department of Transportation has decided to immediately terminate its $2 billion contract with Orion Air due to serious allegations of racial discrimination and human rights violations. We will not tolerate any form of racial discrimination, especially in our strategic partnership with the government. The news hit Orion Air like a bombshell. Leonard Westbrook, pale and panicked, helplessly watched as the company's stock prices plummeted on the financial screen. In just a few hours, billions of dollars in market value had evaporated, putting the company at risk of bankruptcy for the first time in its history. Westbrook stared at the computer screen, his hand shaking as the news ticker flashed across the major websites. Orion Air accused of systemic racial discrimination against black passengers. Jessica Carter, CEO of Carter Capital Group, exposes the truth about Orion Air after being publicly humiliated. U.S. government officially terminates $2 billion contract with Orion Air. Everything was spiraling out of control. The media immediately launched an extensive investigation, peeling back layers of information that exposed the racial discrimination Orion Air had been hiding for years. A number of former employees and passengers spoke out, recounting painful stories of biased, contemptuous, and even humiliating treatment they had endured when using the services of this once reputable airline. All of this was focused on 3 names: Thomas Reed, Trent Maxwell, and Michael Thompson. Images and videos of Jessica Carter being humiliated at the airport quickly spread across social media, becoming a powerful symbol of injustice and racial prejudice. Public outrage erupted, demanding that Orion Air pay for its unethical actions. In the executive office, Westbrook felt his career and reputation shattering before his eyes. The phone kept ringing, with investors, financial partners, and government agencies demanding immediate explanations and accountability. In his desperation, he called for an emergency press conference, trying to control the damage, but all efforts proved futile in the face of the justified anger of the public. Meanwhile, Trent Maxwell was completely broken, his once confident face now pale and devoid of any self-assurance. He was immediately suspended, called into the internal office for investigation, facing the possibility of criminal charges. Thomas Reed and Michael Thompson were quickly fired, becoming the target of fierce media and public criticism. They began to realize that the price for their actions was far too high, but it was already too late to salvage anything. Westbrook sat alone in his dim office, his hands clenched together in desperation, realizing that his fatal mistake had been underestimating the power and influence of Jessica Carter, the woman he had once thought could easily be overlooked like everyone else. He realized he had underestimated Jessica's ability and the power of truth and justice, but most importantly, he understood that Orion Air no longer had any way out. The financial collapse and the destruction of the company's brand reputation were inevitable and unavoidable. He had lost complete control of the company he had built over the years. In the midst of this unprecedented crisis, Orion Air would pay a heavy price for its painful lesson in arrogance, prejudice, and injustice. And Jessica Carter, the woman who had endured this insult, was silently standing backstage, watching as those who had once looked down on her crumbled one by one. As soon as the heavy door of the meeting room closed behind him, Trent Maxwell immediately felt a chilling, suffocating atmosphere engulfing the entire room. The sharp, piercing gazes of the senior leadership team of Orion Air were all focused directly on him, each look filled with disappointment, anger, and an unprecedented level of severity. This was no longer the meeting Trent was familiar with, where he had always confidently asserted his personal power, but rather an internal tribunal, where every wrongdoing was exposed without mercy. Sitting at the center was Leonard Westbrook, the senior executive of Orion Air. Gone was the composed, well-groomed demeanor Westbrook usually exuded. Now, he stared at Trent with a cold, calculating gaze, holding back his fury with maximum restraint, his control on the verge of breaking in front of everyone. He didn't need to speak. A small nod from him, and his assistant immediately pushed a thick file towards Trent. On the cover of the file, in bold red letters, were the words, "Confidential, breach of internal policy." Trent Maxwell, still trying to hold on to the last bit of confidence, grabbed the file and quickly opened it. But as soon as he glanced at the first few lines, his face turned pale, as if all the blood drained from his body. The file contained a detailed and meticulous record of every action he had taken on that fateful day, from intentionally downgrading Jessica Carter's ticket, falsely labeling her as a disruptive passenger, to instructing airport security personnel to carry out acts of public humiliation, all of it documented with clear, undeniable evidence. Trent felt his throat dry up, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. He looked around, desperately searching for some empathy or understanding from the other members of the room, but all he received were icy, disdainful stares. Finally, Westbrook spoke, his voice calm to the point of being cold, but beneath it lay a fury that could no longer be contained. "Maxwell, do you have any idea how much damage your actions have caused to Orion Air? Because of your irresponsible and biased actions, the company is facing the worst financial and media crisis in its history. A $600 million contract has been lost, and now the $2 billion contract with the U.S. government is at risk. Our stock prices are plummeting, the public is outraged, and our reputation is being destroyed minute by minute." Trent swallowed hard, his voice shaking, completely devoid of the confidence he once had. "Mr. Westbrook, I was just following the security procedures." But Westbrook immediately cut him off, his voice sharp and powerful. "Security procedures are not an excuse to treat someone like Jessica Carter with such disrespect and wrongdoing. Do you realize that your actions not only violated basic ethical principles, but also broke federal anti-discrimination laws?" Trent lowered his head in silence, unable to say anything further to justify himself. He knew better than anyone that the evidence laid out before him was undeniable and irrefutable. Every image, video, and testimony was the painful truth he had deliberately ignored when carrying out his actions. Westbrook took a deep breath and continued, his tone even harder and more uncompromising. "Now, Trent, you have two choices. One, you resign immediately, take full responsibility, and leave the company quietly. Two, we will publicly release your name, image, and all the evidence of your misconduct to the international media. At that point, not only will your career be over, but your entire life will be forever tainted with this irreversible stain." The room fell into a deathly silence. Trent felt every eye in the room was waiting for his response. His heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. He realized he had just lost everything in a single moment of mistake. His reputation, his position, his power, and even his personal dignity. Finally, after a long pause, Trent Maxwell slowly lifted his head, his face now showing defeat and desperation, though he tried to hold on to what little pride he had left. "I'll resign." Westbrook nodded, his gaze still cold and emotionless. "Good. I hope you understand that this is the only mercy Orion Air can offer you after everything you've done." Trent stood up, saying nothing further, and walked out of the meeting room in suffocating silence. Each step he took away from the door felt like a knife stabbing deep into his own pride. Trent Maxwell knew that from this moment on, his life and career, which he had worked so hard to build, were completely destroyed, and there was no way to save them. Inside the meeting room, Westbrook watched Trent's defeated figure leave, letting out a weary sigh. He understood that this was just the beginning of a painful process to restore Orion Air's reputation and position. The mistake Trent Maxwell had made would leave deep scars on the company for a long time. And beyond that, Westbrook silently realized the most bitter truth. All of this could have been avoided if he hadn't been so arrogant, if he hadn't underestimated the power and determination of Jessica Carter, the woman they had once belittled and thought would simply endure every insult in silence. But in the end, it was they, the ones who had dared to disrespect her, who were the ones to leave in silence, defeated. As soon as Trent Maxwell left the office, Leonard Westbrook knew he had no choice but to face the public directly. The financial and media crisis had spiraled far beyond his control, spreading at an alarming pace. The criticism from international media, public opinion, and regulatory bodies had pushed Orion Air to the brink of bankruptcy. The reputation he and his colleagues had spent decades building was crumbling like a sandcastle before a fierce tide. The next morning, an emergency press conference was held at Orion Air's headquarters. The room was packed with reporters from the world's largest news outlets. As Westbrook stepped up to the podium, camera flashes went off rapidly, the noise gradually fading into complete silence. Westbrook stood there, feeling an unprecedented sense of pressure and embarrassment in his career. He took a deep breath, his eyes showing signs of fatigue, but his voice remained clear and sincere. "First, I would like to offer my deepest apologies to Ms. Jessica Carter for the grave mistakes we have made against her. The actions taken against Ms. Carter are unacceptable and completely contrary to the values that Orion Air has always upheld." Westbrook paused for a moment, his eyes quickly scanning the audience, who were listening intently to every word. "We fully accept responsibility for the systemic discrimination that has been uncovered within our company. This is not just the fault of a few individuals, but of an entire system that neglected the core values of respect and equality. As the head of Orion Air, I take full responsibility for these serious consequences in front of the public." Westbrook bowed his head low before the media, a gesture that was quickly captured and spread across major news outlets worldwide. The suffocating silence in the room lasted a few seconds before he continued in a firm but humble tone. "We are committed to restructuring our entire management system and employee training to prevent any future discriminatory acts. But I fully understand that the harm we have caused to Ms. Carter and the community cannot be fully undone." Westbrook finished his speech and stepped down from the podium in complete silence. He knew that no matter how sincere his apology was, it could not completely undo the damage Orion Air had suffered. However, he understood that this was a necessary first step toward restoring their reputation, and a painful lesson for both him and the entire airline industry. Meanwhile, Jessica Carter sat silently in her office, watching the press conference on the large screen with absolute composure. She felt neither joy nor a sense of victory. Instead, she only felt relief that justice had finally prevailed. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from major news agencies, but Jessica declined them all. She didn't want fame, nor did she want to make herself the center of attention. For Jessica, the most important thing had already been accomplished: the powerful reminder that no one has the right to insult another person based on their race or any other difference. Jessica knew that her decisive actions had not only had a profound impact on Orion Air, but it also created a powerful ripple effect across the entire international airline industry. Major airlines immediately began to review and overhaul their policies, adding stricter measures to combat discrimination, retraining employees on ethics and human rights. A wave of change, fierce and determined, spread everywhere, transforming the airline industry for good. Orion Air, despite its best efforts to recover from this crisis, could never fully repair the scars left on its reputation. Although the stock price recovered slightly, it would never return to its previous peak. The public would always remember Orion Air as a symbol of a serious failure in dealing with discrimination. No matter how much the airline changed, people would always view them with suspicion, as a cautionary example for all other companies. As for Jessica Carter, the determined and strong woman, she continued her work quietly but more effectively than ever. She never appeared before the media, but her story spread everywhere as a powerful symbol of justice and the strength of an individual standing up against injustice. She had become a symbol of intelligence, decisiveness, and courage in the fight against racial discrimination. Whenever Jessica's name was mentioned, people didn't just remember the incident at LaGuardia Airport, but also how she chose to act decisively and intelligently, addressing the root cause of the issue instead of merely reacting with emotion. And that was the most profound lesson Jessica left for the entire world. The story of Jessica Carter would forever be remembered as a living testament to the power of an individual standing against social injustice, and also as the strongest warning for anyone still harboring prejudices and discrimination. One brave action, one sharp decision, had the power to change an entire industry, and more importantly, create an everlasting mark in the fight for justice and equality. What do you think about how Jessica handled the situation? If you were in her shoes, would you dare to stand up and fight like she did? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share this video to spread this meaningful message, and subscribe to the channel to follow more inspiring stories about justice and courage in everyday life. Thank you for being with us.